I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce today's presenter, Thomas Brechtel, JD, Chief Revenue Officer at Form I-9 Compliance. Thomas Brechtel is an expert in immigration law and employment eligibility requirements, including I-9 and E-Verify. He guides organizations in developing and maintaining compliant immigration-related employment practices, supplying comprehensive I-9 auditing and policy reviews, electronic transition planning, and new hire and remote processing assistance and services. Brechtel is also a regular contributor to workshops and seminars with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, U.S. Immigration and Custom Enforcement, and their ICE mutual agreement between government and employers, covering such topics as hiring procedures, fraudulent document detection, and E-Verify. Now I will turn the presentation over to Thomas.
Thank you, Heidi, and welcome everyone. Today we'll be going over electronic I-9, some of the benefits of the electronic I-9, and the link to E-Verify. Heidi, is my volume good?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, so obviously Form I-9 Compliance is a proud partner of AccuSource, and based on that fact, we provide I-9 and E-Verify services in its totality, everything related to I-9 and everything related to E-Verify. So we've developed an electronic air detecting I-9 form, and then we can go in backwards to 1986 and offer auditing services and consulting. Bottom line is, any pain points you're experiencing, we can address. So this solution gives you an immediate overview of everything in your database, makes it very easy to respond to notices of inspection if you should ever receive one. And the bottom line is, we understand what your needs are, and we can implement an electronic I-9 process related to those needs. So it's a comprehensive, we're proud of our partnership with AccuSource, and based on that fact, we are here to assist you in any of your questions. Today's session, we're going to cover Form I-9 and E-Verify. You may all know about the Form I-9, you may not. You may know about E-Verify, but we'll go over that and summarize it. We'll talk about remote hires related to COVID flexibility and additional options you may have. Obviously, there's a lot of hires out there that are working remote, and you still need to complete an I-9 form for those individuals. So we have some solutions for that. Standard operating procedures, you may have them, you may not, but I think it's a benefit, even if you're doing a paper-based process, to have some standardized processes related to I-9 and what those procedures are. Unauthorized workers remaining on payroll, a big red flag. Obviously, this is primarily related to updating work documents that expire. We'll go through that. Some common misconceptions of E-Verify. How the electronic database gives you an ease of use to monitor what's going on and what needs to be updated, because at the end of the day, the I-9 is a living, breathing document. You don't just finish it and put it away. You have to monitor it, especially related to expiring documents. And then when somebody separates from the organization, there's a termination process. Notices of inspection, we'll touch that a little bit related to how you become audit ready. And then finally, advantages of using an electronic I-9 vendor. And then, as Heidi pointed out, we'll have an open forum with some Q&A. Lot to cover. We'll get through it. I will not bore you with specifics. I will go into the details. So Form I-9 requirements. Here's the I-9 form. We all know it's a 2-page document. We all know that you need to complete it for everyone you hire that is going to receive remuneration. So the I-9 is divided into basically 3 sections. Section 1 is the employee information, basic data, name, address, social if you're using E-Verify, and citizenship status, and then they execute and date it. The completion of Section 1 has to be done on or before the date of hire. And we're all probably aware that the data hire is over on the right side of the page within section 2 in the middle there, where that's the data hire, right down under the certification area. So that's what qualifies timeliness. Section 1, on or before the first day of hire, the data hire is there in section 2. There's a prepare a translator option where somebody who needs assistance can have somebody assist them in completing section 1, and then they would be required to fill out the bottom of page 1 as the preparer translator. Section 2 is where the employer or the authorized representative will touch and feel documents and record those to establish the new hire's identity and their eligibility to work. Those are either list A documents or B and C. We should all know that a B document confirms identity, C documents confirm employment authorization, and A documents confirm both. Section 2 needs to be completed on or before the 3rd business day from the date of hire. So the date of hire is the primary date on this form. You can be fined for late completion, the 1-day, 3-day rule. Section 3 is primarily for updating expiring work documents, although under Block B, there's an opportunity to rehire somebody. You complete an I-9, somebody separates, they're rehired within the next week or so or next 2 months. You can reactivate the I-9 by using Section 3, data rehire under Block B. And then finally, Block A is for name changes. It's recommended, but it's not required that if somebody changes their name, you would note their name change in Section 3, Block A. So that's a brief description of the I-9. Again, the data hire is the most important date on this form because it established timely completion. E-Verify is the core, the Form I-9 is the core of E-Verify, meaning that once you complete the I-9 form, you can use E-Verify, and E-Verify confirms work eligibility. So E-Verify takes the data from the I-9 form, runs it through DHS and SSA databases, and comes back immediately with a result. E-Verify is required of certain states on a state level, federal contracts with certain clauses in them, mandate the use of E-Verify, or employers can just elect to use E-Verify just to establish differentiation. So there's options there. It confirms newly hired employees. Existing employees can only be done if you have a qualifying federal contract. So step 1 is the Form I-9. Step 2, if you choose to use it, is E-Verify. Few of the requirements of E-Verify, there's a memorandum of understanding. If you want to use E-Verify, you execute an MOU. We happen to be an employer agent through the web services integration with E-Verify. So we create the MOU, you would execute it. There's posters required so everybody that you hire knows that you will be using the E-Verify database to confirm work eligibility. If you use E-Verify, the social is required in section 1 of the I-9. If you do not use it, believe it or not, it's an optional data field. List B documents, if you use E-Verify, must contain a photo. Most of them do, some don't, but it would be required if you use E-Verify. And E-Verify also confirms through a photo tool, it confirms the pictures on certain documents under List A, one being the U.S. passport card, permanent resident card, and what is the employment authorization card, I-766. The actual photo used to create the card shows up on the screen if that's the document the individual gives you. And you confirm that those match. Again, state level requirements, federal contractor rule. That's the overview of E-Verify. And you'll see here, here's a map. And this map denotes what states have certain E-Verify requirements. So those states, if you have any locations in those states, you should certainly research them and make sure you're not supposed to be using E-Verify. If you have any questions, please contact AccuSource and we will get that information over to you. Let's talk about remote hires. The latest update was at the end of May, where the remote compliance flexibility option was extended through the summer to August 31st, 2021. This means there's certain requirements on that, but it basically means the touch and feel requirement in Section 2, where the employer or their authorized representative must view the documents in person. This gives them the flexibility to defer that review in person, and they can review it over a webcam or by sending the documents in through fax or email, and the employer can denote that on the form, but keeping in mind that they have a follow-up requirement later. So that's the COVID flexibility. It's been in play since last year, giving the employers the option to do it that way, to defer the touch and feel requirement. That's the latest update. On March 20th of 2020, due to COVID, that's when the flexibility started. And again, it's deferring the touch and feel. It does not eliminate it. You still have to, once normal operations resume, you must touch and feel documentation for everyone you hired using the flexibility option within 3 business days, meaning that if you've done thousands of these, within 3 business days after returning to normal operations, you need to update all those I-9 forms. So you need to start planning now if you've done that. If you have any questions, let us know, but you must conduct that in-person review of the I-9 documents that you did virtually prior. Pretty simple. A lot of employers have returned to normal operations and they need to start implementing those if you use that flexibility. So you need to start planning now if you haven't already started, making sure that once normal operations resume, you have a process in place so you can do an in-person verification of the documentation that you previously did virtually. As employers welcome a return to normal operations, DHS 2 will soon return to normal operations and focus on employer compliance. So just beware, if you did this, you have to schedule those in-person reviews. If you did this, there's no change to the Section 1. The employer gets it, fills out Section 1, signs and dates it. Section 2 is where you would have the ability, using the virtual verification, in-person verification later, virtual verification now. You would denote, or on the electronic I-9, we have a COVID-19 box, which you would check, which would denote on the dashboard that you had follow-up requirements. So that would apply to Section 2 and or Section 3 if there was a re-verification. Again, you need to go back and do an in-person verification once normal operations resume. And here's the requirements. So if you did virtual verification under COVID flexibility, you would denote COVID-19 in the additional information field, so you have a call up. If you did a Section 3, you would hit COVID-19 extension in the additional information field. I will touch on this again. A physical inspection, which means touch and feel of the documents, must take place after normal operations resume within 3 business days. The date of the physical inspection and who conducted it should be recorded in the additional information field. So that is your go-to. If you use an electronic I-9 system, they should have the ability, they should have those easy steps for you to follow through so you have a call-up requirement. The Form I-9 system through AccuSource has that in place, so it makes it very easy. But again, I won't touch on this again. Remote option operations flexibility, follow-up requirements. And this just goes over the 3 business days because I think that's very important that the individual, hopefully it's the same individual that did the inspection virtually, will be the same one. If the inspection is done by someone else, let's say the individual that previously did it, reviewed the documents virtually, completed the I-9 form is not there, and someone else is going to do the in-person inspection, you have the options You can complete a new I-9 form, or you can denote in the additional information field who did it. You also have some issues related to supplying different documents, etc. Again, if you have any more questions on this, please contact AccuSource and we'll get you the proper information. There's an additional option that a lot of the clients are using right now, which means that basically for a remote hire, the employer has the ability to designate an authorized representative to act on their behalf to complete Section 2 or Section 3. That individual will sign, but that individual is touching and feeling the documents, so you have no in-person follow-up requirements. It's in the instructions that the employer can do this. So we have a remote agent verification option, which means that the employee completes Section 1, and then they would choose somebody, employee designate, we call it, friend, neighbor, spouse, to act as the authorized representative. This is a process being used by a lot of employers right now, on the caveat being that the employer needs to review the I-9 once it's done. So if you're using a paper I-9, obviously there's a lot of back and forth involved. If you use an electronic I-9 system, it's easy. And once normal operations resume, there's still going to be a significant number of remote hires out there that need to have their documents touch and feel in person. So this is a good follow-up and a good process to eliminate and abide by the regulations. There's also a notary network that we partnered with, where the notary will go out, schedule a time and date to meet with the individual, and they will complete Section 2 electronically. So 2 options for remotes, true remote hires: to abide by the regulations, which require that you touch and feel the documents when you record the documents in Section 2 or Section 3. The employee designate option, where you give the employee instructions. Maybe it's somebody over the age of 21, not an immediate family member. Whatever those instructions are, we have the option to create customized content for that. The other option is a notary representative, where Section 1 is done and then the notary communicates through text messaging to the new hire, and they schedule a convenient day and time to meet. Those 2 options. Either option, the employer should have some kind of internal follow-up on reviewing the form, making sure everything's right, and then if they use E-Verify, that's when E-Verify should be submitted. So we hit on the remote hires, the 2 options, the flexibility. Standard operating procedures. I'm a big fan of standard operating procedures, and every employer should have some, meaning that, let's just say you have 10 locations or you have 500 locations. Everybody should be doing the I-9 process the same. How do you do Section 1? How does Section 2 get done? Do you retain copies of the source documents? Do you submit E-Verify? How do you follow up on TNCs if you get something related to E-Verify? Who's responsible? All that is encompassed in standard operating procedures, and they don't have to be 65 pages. They can be 1 or 2 pages, simplistic processes that everybody follows. And each one's unique to their own structure. So I'm a big fan of standard operating procedures. Again, if you don't have any, I strongly suggest you have some. I've been through notices of inspection with employers, and I understand that one of the requirements, especially when you're using an electronic system, is your internal business processes. Those are your standard operating procedures. You may have 3 or 4 different sequences. You got remote hires, you got brick and mortar hires, you got individuals that are not going to go to an actual location, they're out in the field. Whatever it is, we can establish those standard operating procedures. Unauthorized workers on payroll. This is basically, when you use an electronic system, you have a single source database to monitor what's going on. You're not going through a bunch of paper in a file cabinet. You have that database. And, a best practice is you start using it for your new hires. We create those processes. And then all your historical records, whether they're in a file cabinet, whether they're in some other I-9 vendor system, wherever they are, we can migrate those over too. So when you log in through the AccuSource system, you're going to be able to see a comprehensive database. And that compliance dashboard is going to give you immediate access to what's important. So you're going to know that if somebody's work document's expiring, it's going to tell you. We're also going to send out email alerts to you, notifying you that John Smith has a document that will expire in the next 120 days. Get a hold of John and let him know that. And then you'll have the dashboard monitoring. Receipts. Some receipts are valid related to, let's say it's a Social Security. I don't have my List C Social Security card. I go down, I get a receipt for a replacement. That's acceptable temporarily for 90 days as a receipt. That individual must bring in the Social Security card they get so that you can update Section 2 and remove the receipt designation. We also have alerts on that as well. So compliance dashboard, single source, everything in one system. Expiring documents, critical that those get updated prior to the expiration in Section 3. Receipts, critical that those get updated and the receipt designations removed. E-Verify, we didn't get into, there's certain cases when they're submitted to E-Verify that come back with action required on the employer and the employee, most importantly, the employee side. So you want to be able to, on the compliance dashboard, verify the E-Verify case closure statements. Make sure they're all proper. Make sure that if somebody received a tentative non-confirmation, which means there's an issue, doesn't mean they're not eligible to work. It means there's an issue, and they can take action. If they decide not to take action, you should be terminating that individual. They may take action and it comes back final non-confirmation or no-show. Those require that you take immediate action, and with your internal processes, it may result in a termination. It may result that the individual didn't really understand what they needed to do. But the dashboard's going to give you that monitoring. Civil penalties, obviously, if you're not updating individuals with expired documents, you can receive civil penalties if you ever receive a notice of inspection and the update was not timely. So we've gone over unauthorized workers on payroll and the advantages of an electronic system. E-Verify common mistakes and misconceptions. Once you sign up for E-Verify, you must use it for all new hires. No ifs, ands, or buts. Everybody gets processed through E-Verify. You cannot verify current employees unless you have a federal contract and you designate that you're going to do that. You can't use the system to pre-screen. You don't I-9 an individual till they've accepted an offer. Once they accept an offer, they get an I-9. They complete Section 1. They give you the documents for Section 2. They prove who they are and their eligibility to work. You can't e-verify them to pre-screen them to make sure they're authorized to work. There has to be offer, acceptance, I-9. Once the I-9 is done, you e-verify. Handling mismatches, TNCs. When somebody has a tentative non-confirmation, it means, as I said earlier, it means there's an issue. Doesn't mean they're not eligible to work. It could be as simple as somebody who just got married and they get hired, and in Section 1, they use their married name. Their social's still in their maiden name. When that is submitted, that is going to come back a tentative non-confirmation because it's not matching up with the SSA databases. Easy. The individual takes action. They go down to SSA. It gets resolved. Common mismatches. That's just an example. Preventing an employee from working while contesting a TNC. As I said earlier, when you get a tentative non-confirmation, the employee has a right to take action. Once they take action, they have 8 federal government workdays to take action, which means they get in their car and they drive down to their local SSA office and they present them a letter that's spit out from the E-Verify system. They have to continue to work. The assumption is everyone's eligible to work until the system tells you otherwise. You also got to make sure that they're not misunderstanding what they're supposed to do. And you never request a status update during those 8 federal government workdays. If they don't show up, the system will tell you. If they do, the system will tell you. So those are some common mistakes and misconceptions on the E-Verify system. A few more. Not treating E-Verify seriously. It's, there's a memorandum of understanding that's executed with Homeland Security, Form I-9 compliance as the employer agent for web services and the employer. There's specific employer requirements in that MOU, so you must take that very seriously. E-Verify also has a monitoring division that identifies possible discriminatory practices, employer misuse. They conduct desk or on-site visits to discuss observations on the use of the system. E-Verify does not fine employers, but they may refer cases for suspected misuse, abuse, etc. So not only does E-Verify a great system to verify what's on the I-9 form, you have to watch that everyone's using it correctly. That's why when we have a client that's going to use E-Verify, every single user that's going to use the E-Verify system must take and pass a test so that they know exactly what to do based on what the result that comes back in. The future mandatory E-Verify, I don't think it's a question of if, it's a question of when. Everyone will be required to use E-Verify. Right now, it's in certain bills that have passed through Congress related to that. We don't know right now if they're going to get through the Senate and become law, but there's been talk for several years, I think going back 7 or 8 years, the fact that E-Verify eventually will become mandatory for all employers so that the I-9 form they're required to do is verified. The data is verified. Monitoring an electronic database. So when you use an electronic system, there's an error detecting I-9 form. Beautiful. You can send out section 1 remote. You can have section 2 done based on brick and mortar, based on, true remote hire, etc. You can use Form I-9 only and not use E-Verify. Or you can use Form I-9 and E-Verify. It's linked together. So once Form I-9 is done in section 2, E-Verify is processed. Or you can use just E-Verify only. From the smallest employers to the largest employers, it doesn't matter if you're still doing a small employer doing paper I-9s, they can sign up and use E-Verify because it's a quick, easy dashboard. It gives them immediate access to those tools. Obviously, the recommendation, and the larger the employer, the use of electronic I-9 is going to benefit tremendously on what they're doing and their compliance monitoring. Payroll feeds, critical. New hire feeds, data hire verification, termination feeds. So if you use an electronic system, we can set up automated payroll feeds so you can verify that all new hires have an I-9 completed. You can verify that that data hire in section 2 matches what's in your payroll records. And when somebody separates, you can apply a term date to the record. And the beauty of the system is it's going to calculate retention, 1 year, 3-year rule. Everyone gets confused on that. It will calculate retention and purge that record automatically, giving you the option to unterminate and reactivate as a data rehire. You have subject matter expertise, whether it's internal or whether external. You have a system and a vendor in place through AccuSource that's going to be able to give you immediate response to questions. And I-9 questions are usually, they need quick response to. It's an I-9 being completed. You have that expertise. Training processes and procedures. What better way to have established standard operating procedures and everybody being trained on the proper processes than to use an electronic I-9 form so that everyone is doing it the same way. Here's a quick shot of the compliance dashboard I mentioned earlier. You look at it, you log in, you see this dashboard. You'll see the different color boxes. Red means something. Blue just give you data. You have immediate access to this. So when you look at this dashboard, under summary, you see the electronic Form I-9. Those are 390 are your active. You have 5 that have been terminated, and you have none that have re-verification due within the next 120 days. Easy. Again, we send out alerts on these re-verification due. Right next to that are scanned I-9s. These are your historical records that you would migrate over. You would be able to see those as active. You'd have the term option and also the re-verification due, because we're going to index that expiring document date. And the beauty of those records is the section 3s associated with the image are all done electronically. So at the top level of the dashboard, you'll see a comprehensive total of your active employees. We break this apart too. If you have 500 locations, each location will have their own dashboard, and at the top level, it'll be a comprehensive view. When you look down below on this dashboard, action re-verification expired or expired scans means the work document was not timely updated, and this employer has 6 individuals on active payroll with an expired work document. Not a good deal. Pending I-9 means it was started, wasn't completed. Not a good deal. Receipt update due. 2, not good, because they've actually gone over their 90 days and they didn't bring in their actual document. And I do want to point out, E-Verify cannot be processed if somebody gives you a receipt. You have to wait until they bring in the actual document. E-Verify due, this means you're clicking a button to submit it. We also have an auto process. And documents missing, source documents. If you retain those, retain them for all, upload them to the I-9, and the dashboard will tell you who doesn't have any documents loaded. So this gives you the comprehensive view. Hopefully that'll give you the visual on what that could look like. Let's talk about a notice of inspection. As I said earlier, you may never get one. You may have had one, or you may get one in the future. Nobody knows. But a notice of inspection basically means that somebody, the government is going to knock on your door, Homeland Security investigations, knock on your door, hand you a subpoena, and say, we will be back in 3 days, and we want to see all the I-9 forms for this location or all of them in totality. We'll be back. We want to pick up the I-9 forms, and then they're going to go away with your payroll file and audit those forms. They're looking for timeliness, 1 day, 3 day rules. They're looking for missing I-9s. They're looking for I-9s that weren't properly updated. They're just looking to make sure that you're treating the I-9 process seriously. And anyone can receive a notice of inspection. I'm actually working with our clients right now on 6 inspection notices. And the beauty of those notices was the employer got the notice, their legal contacted me, we did the export of the I-9s they needed, I did the internal business process document that's required, I customized it for them, and then I'm available for any demos or any questions that the auditors have on the use of the electronic I-9 system. So you have a partner in place. So anyone can get a notice of inspection. Hopefully nobody ever will that's on the call today. Becoming audit ready. Electronic I-9, there's significant requirements when a vendor offers an electronic I-9. We adhere to all those requirements. There's audit trails, there's software provider information, there's how we index, the ability to print the I-9 form, and the electronic system demonstration. So there's some guidance that came out, believe it, almost 10 years ago on what inspectors from HSI and ICE would look for when they're auditing an electronic system. The results, the most common notices are notice of inspection results, which is basically a compliance letter, meaning that you're in total compliance. No fines, no issues. Notice of suspect documents. This may indicate some individuals have documents that may not be genuine, and they give you the notice of suspect documents or notice of discrepancies. meaning that they need more information on this group of individuals. Notice of technical or procedural failures. This gives you a 10-day correction period, meaning that if they give you these I-9s back, you have 10 days to correct them because they're merely technical errors. The errors are divided into technical or substantive. Substantive, you can't correct. Technical, you have the 10-day correction period. Either way, you want to address it now and not address it with 10-day notice to go through and try to correct those errors. You may get a warning notice, or ultimately you could get a notice of intent to fine, meaning that after the review of all these I-9 records, we're going to fine you this amount of money. And then you have a challenge to those fines and you can go through it. But that's basically in a nutshell what can happen. Makes no sense. Big, small, not to use an electronic system that gives you immediate access to your records. That's the beauty of the electronic I-9. The fines were increased, not much in 2020. They actually increased the fines for penalties assessed after June 17, 2020. These are just a few of those, not significant, but you can see they're going up and up. Paper I-9s pose a risk, and down there in red, somebody at USCIS estimates that 76% of paper I-9s have errors. Now, I'm not saying that every electronic I-9 doesn't have errors. Obviously, the electronic I-9 is a great tool, but timeliness is an issue. Missing I-9s are an issue. Improper documentation is an issue. It won't allow for over documentation, but you still have to select and accept the correct documentation. But it's interesting, 76% of I-9s have errors. So if you're out serving notices of inspection, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's easy. Non-compliance with Form I-9 is costly. It's very costly, and all employers need to take it very seriously. And there's 4 bullet points, and I'm going to read it. A cleaning service that failed to sign Section 2 for 25 employees was fined $44,000. 25 employees, the employer did not sign Section 2. A transportation company failed to fill out I-9s in a timely manner. Remember the 1 year, 3 year, 1 year, 3 year, 1 day, 3 day rule. Sorry. For 54 employees, they were fined $109,000, meaning they were late. They were either late in Section 1 or they were late in Section 2. 2017, 4 years ago, Panda Express required all of its legal permanent resident employees to renew their I-9s. Permanent residents do not renew their I-9 forms. That was an error. That showed discrimination. And based on that, they fined the Panda Express franchise $400,000. An event planning company failed to sign Section 2, like the first one, for 797 employees. That fine was $605,000. So you can see how critical timeliness. Again, Section 1, honor before the first day of employment. First day of employment is the date in Section 2. Section 2 by the 3rd business day. So this will give you an identification on what possible potential fines are out there and how all employers must really clean, whether they do an internal audit, whether they have an external audit, they should all be using an electronic I-9 system. I think E-Verify is a great tool, and they should have the monitoring going on internally or externally to make sure everything is as it should be. Here's a quick, and the slide's more complicated than it seems. I mean, less complicated than it seems. You'll see there's a decision. That decision on the right side in blue means you're going to use the electronic system, or you may be using one now that's not really giving you what you need. You use the electronic I-9, you have the E-Verify option, and then you have capture 24/7 and storage of those records, immediate access for new hires. Over on the left are existing employees in red. You have paper, you have them in another database, You don't really know what you have. So we can audit the forms. We can help you remediate and take you through the steps to remediate. And then we capture those, scan, index. So you have both existing. This rule has been in place since November of 1986. So if you have an employee that was working with you since 1990, for example, you have their I-9 form. That I-9 form would be scanned and indexed. So that's the decision point. You make it, new hires electronic, existing employees, we remediate. Advantages of an electronic vendor, I think they're tremendous, but you'll see the compliance layer, the subject matter expertise, the partner, standard operating procedures. You have to have them if you use an electronic system. You'd be surprised how many organizations are using one that don't have one. Every single location's doing it differently. Big mistake. Flexible workflows. We configure the process with the system so that you know how section 1 gets done, how section 2 gets done. Flexible workflows based on what your processes are. Compliance dashboard. I showed you that. Critical that you have something. Besides, I know reporting is great, and bottom line is anything that's captured in the system's available in reporting, but nobody wants to go through reporting all the time. They need a dashboard. That's what you get. Notice of inspection support. Critical. Somebody there to work with you or your team on responding to an NOI. And customer support and assistance. In a nutshell, that gives you everything you need. And we can look at anyone's existing I-9 process and make it better. So in closing, and we're getting almost to the 45-minute range, in closing, employers should ask themselves these questions. Very basic. Are your existing I-9 records compliant? Some employers will say absolutely they are. It's surprising whenever there's a churn in HR or in the organization and somebody new comes in, they always want to audit the forms of the old one because they don't want to accept all the issues that are going on. So are your existing I-9 records compliant? It's yes or no, or I don't know. If you don't know, you should find out. Could you provide all the records within 72 hours in the event of an inspection? Have you recently completed an audit of your current I-9 records? Do you audit your records periodically, annually? Are you missing any records? Big issue, missing I-9 records, especially if you're decentralized. Are you properly updating expiring work documents or receipts? Are you purging records based on a separation in the 1-year, 3-year rule? And do you have a current provider? There's a lot of companies out there that offer an electronic I-9. Some have foundation behind it, some don't. I'm not going to compare. I'm just saying if you have a current provider, make sure they adhere to all the requirements that that provider needs to adhere to related to the regulations. Okay, so Heidi, we're at the question part.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. Now we will dedicate the remainder of the webinar to addressing attendees' questions. If you have not had a chance to ask a question via our chat box, please feel free to do so now.
Thanks, Heidi. So the first question we got is checking IDs virtually acceptable? What are the proper guidelines for remote verification of employee documents?
Well, there's a lot there. I went over that flexibility. It's to virtually inspect documents. It's based on the flexibility option. But again, if you do that, you still have to schedule time within 3 business days after normal operations resume to meet with that person and touch and feel their documents and update the I-9 form. So that flexibility has been extended through August of this year. Who knows if it'll be extended again? Probably not. So you can virtually inspect documents right now. based on certain requirements that you need to adhere to. But again, you need that follow-up requirement once normal operations resume. That's why if you have remote hires, you should really look into either the employee designate option or the option to meet with a member of a notary network for proper completion of Section 2.
Perfect. The next question that we got is there a grace period on expiring documents?
No. Now, there are certain categories and certain documents under temporary protected status that will auto extend, whether it's 180 or whatever the TPS is for the country. There's no grace period. You still have the requirement to update the I-9 form if those happen. So you may have 797 notices with categories got to match. It's very complicated. You may have students with I-20s or on OPT that require a 766. So bottom line is there's no grace period. But if you have any more questions, please ask AccuSource and we'll get back to you.
Perfect. The next question is how current is the dashboard on I-9 Advantage? Once updates have been applied to an I-9, how long does it take for the dashboard to update?
Within a minute.
All right. The next question that we had is, with all the ways to falsify important docs, what options are there to validate authentic documents?
Well, that's a great question. We actually have a document review option where documents, the I-9's completed, source documents are loaded into the system, and then somebody here would then go in and review those documents, make sure they appear to be genuine, and make sure they're proper documents from the list of documents. So I think, the employer themselves is not supposed to be a document expert. And they could accept the document and it could even clear verify. That happens too. So if you're really serious about making sure the source documents are legit and appear to be genuine, there's ancillary services that we offer to do that. But again, it's well established that the employer representative who receives documents is not a document expert. And if the document appears to be genuine, they record the document and take a copy or don't take a copy and hand it back to the employee.
All right. The next question is if the Social Security office is taking appointments only, will this be an issue?
It could be, but it hasn't been recently. I think there's an ability to go online and apply for that replacement Social Security card. I've seen where people have uploaded from their phone their verification that they've done that. So I don't think you have to go to the Social Security Administration unless it's a unique situation. Make an appointment and go. But a lot of times you can go online and apply for a new Social Security card.
All right. The next question we have is, how should I-9 cleanup be handled once we are allowed to return to the office?
Well, there's a lot of branches off that question. I think that question relates to virtual verification. If it is, you need to establish a process as the employees return back. Those whose documents were reviewed virtually will need to establish an appointment with a representative, and that I-9 will need to be updated. Once it's updated, it would be complete with the denoting in the additional information field what was done. So there's a lot to that question, and we should probably take that offline if you have any more questions related to that. But if it's not related to the flexibility, once you get back, we need to go through and make sure you've got I-9s for everybody and exactly how Section 2 was done.
All right. If a USA passport expires while the employee is working, do we need to update the the I-9 form? And
No,
how is it done?
no, you only update certain documents in the US passport, just like the driver's license. If it was valid when the I-9 was completed, you never updated. You remember that case from Panda Express that they were requiring permanent residents to renew their I-9s? That was improper updating of a document that doesn't require updating. So it's very important from a discriminatory practice that you don't make individuals who are not required to update their documents update them. So there's only a few documents, I-94s, employment authorization cards, I-766, and certain other documents that require updating. That's the beauty of a compliance dashboard.
All right. How do you handle names not matching on documents?
Well, there's in section 1, there's other last names used at the far right. So there's the last name, first name over there. So any other names that have been used, I think each case is unique. Like I pointed out, you may have a driver's license with a certain name on it and a social with a certain name on it. Driver's license may have the married name on it. The social has the maiden name on it. You want to make sure they get that social changed, but in the meantime, other last names used would be used in section 1.
I think this question kind of goes back to the first one, but are pictures of documents acceptable to fill out an I-9?
Temporarily, based on certain requirements, and there's specific requirements, you can do that. So under flexibility, yes, if you adhere to all the requirements. When the I-9 is done, there is still a touch and feel requirement. So you either touch and feel it now or you touch and feel it later. But somebody's going to have to touch and feel that document and have that person right in front of you.
All right. If there are more than 2 work permits, how do we notate it in the I-9 form?
Well, it's kind of hard to answer that question. I think you may be talking about a student or somebody with a, foreign passport, I-94 under duration of status and an I-20 that would fall under the list A 3 document option, whether it's an F1 or a J1 student with a DS 2019, that's where those I would assume that's where that question's going. But if it's not, you can always elevate that to AccuSource and we'll get you the proper information.
All right. Can someone receive a TNC if they were a resident and then became a citizen? However, they never updated their status?
Possibly. You could have, if somebody elevates their status, they go from, an alien authorized to work to a permanent resident, they could still have a restricted social as well. Normally, the databases at SSA and DHS are pretty timely updated. So it just depends on what status they're in and how quickly that status was changed.
Thanks, Thomas. We're almost at the end of our time, so this will be the final live question. Again, attendees, if you entered a question into the chat box and we didn't have the opportunity to address it live, our team will follow up with you directly post-webinar to provide an answer. So Thomas, the last question that we have is if a new hire's ID renewal is to arrive in the mail, can we accept the expired ID?
No, they have to provide you a receipt, and there's certain statewide, each state has unique on accepting expired documents. So I think it's going to depend on the state and where they're currently at. You cannot accept an expired document. However, they could have a receipt or a temporary license that would elevate that to unexpired, depending on what it is. A temporary license is going to have a photo on it, so it can be used for List B. A receipt, like those in California, have no photo on it, but it is a receipt good for 90 days.
Thank you, Thomas, for facilitating this informative webinar, and special thanks to our attendees for joining us today. If you have any questions, please contact us at sales@accusource-online.com